Hello, and welcome back to A Witch Alone's podcast. I'm your hostess, Danielle, and we'll be continuing with the mini-series on diving into basic practice techniques. While this isn't really a technique, we will be discussing practicing solitaire versus joining a coven. Compared to the last episode and the one before that, and probably the next episode, this one is going to seem pretty short, as it will be completely biased based entirely on my own experiences and research. I am in no way about to tell you that one way of practice is better than the other, but I have only ever worked alone, so that is kind of where my heart lies. Basically, because I've only worked alone, I will probably never feel comfortable working in a group. That is purely based on the fact that I still feel like I'm always learning and would never want to embarrass myself in front of others. That is totally a me thing, and it's not the most healthy frame of mind, but I'm working on it. There are obviously some pros to working on your own and some cons to working on your own. So, pros would be you can kind of just do whatever you want whenever you want. If you suddenly need to do a spell for yourself or for someone, you can kind of just go ahead and do it. I'm not sure if it's the same in a coven or if anything you do has to be done, with the guidance of your elder. I don't really know how that works. But if you can only do spells when you're with your coven mates, that kind of puts a damper on your own personal practice. I doubt that's what it's like, but I don't know. You can schedule to do your rituals and your celebrations whenever you want. Obviously, some people, covens probably would want to do them as close to the actual date as possible. I'm sure every witch wants to have their celebration as close to the actual date as possible, but that might not be available to them. Like, say you work 12-hour shifts and you're going to be working completely through a celebration, so you're going to be working the few days before, during, and the few days after the Sabbath or the full moon. You kind of can't you can't just not go, and you can't stay up for 24 hours or 36 hours so that you can celebrate. So I'm not sure if I'm not sure if you'd be penalized for not being able to do that. I would like to think that you wouldn't be, but if I was in a coven and I couldn't make it, I would feel guilty, like I was letting my coven mates down. So when it's just me, I don't feel guilty. Well, I feel a little guilty, but it's mostly just about me. I don't feel guilty for other people. I'm not holding anybody back, is the point. If you choose to work solitary, you are completely in control of your own research and learning. Some covens, especially if you're going to join a Wiccan coven, might require you to do the 365 days of practice, 366 days of practice technically, which, again, if you can't do every day in a row or something like that, maybe they say you can't join, or it just takes forever to be part of the coven, and then maybe you get into it and you're like, wow, I don't want to be here. You know how sometimes you try your hardest to get into a program for university, and you're like, yeah, I've been working for 3 years to do this, and then you get into it and you're like, this sucks. This is not at all what I wanted. You don't know, right? So at least if you're on your own, you kind of have your own. You can just learn at your own pace. You don't have to feel pressure to learn something, or get it right or get it wrong like you did in school, because I hated that. Or if you have to take tests, I don't know, I would hate to try and take a test when it comes to trying to get into a coven. Solitary might also be a better fit for people that are still in the broom closet. I'm not sure how easily you could be able to convince your family or your friends that you're going to a normal societal thing. I don't know, you want to try and be like, oh, I'm going to knitting group or something. And of course I pick knitting because I'm an old lady at heart. They might be a little bit easier to be solitary, which if you're still in the broom closet, because you can control how much your family or your friends see. Whereas if you're in a coven, like, I don't know, maybe someone accidentally lets it slip when they walk by you on the street, or, you get a letter from the coven about new things that are happening, or something like that. Like, I don't know. It might be a little easier, safer that way. Now, on the opposite side, cut out the pro of working in a coven and the con of working solitary is that they do keep you accountable. They do help you learn, and they can help you get into the groove of practicing and celebrating with the Wheel of the Year around the same time that the actual celebration is, which can be helpful if you have a hard time with your own self-discipline, like yours truly, right? Like, if I had been in a coven, who knows, I would be a little more in tune to the world around me, because I would have just learned about it and gotten into the groove of it, kind of the same way that you just grow up in this society with Christmas and Thanksgiving and Halloween. Like, the 1st of October hits, and witch or not, my entire house is decorated, but like the 1st of September hits and I'm not always like, oh, I should decorate for Mabon. It's something you have to get in the groove of, and I feel like if you were in a coven and you had all these friends that you could rely on, you would be able to fall into that thought pattern a little bit easier, which might make learning and feeling more confident in your craft easier. Again, if you are in the broom closet and you join a coven and the inevitable happens where unfortunately you get kicked out or something like that, you have this whole family of witches that would probably be willing to take you in. Like, I know if I had a coven mate, especially a younger coven mate, like if someone was 18 or 19 and they got kicked out of their house because they're practicing witchcraft, I would absolutely take them in, because like I know how nerve-wracking it can be being young and coming into this path, especially in a religious family, like as accepting or non-accepting as they may or may not be, it's still nerve-wracking. So you do have, I would assume you'd have a safety net of working in a coven. So there's another pro to working in a coven. The only other thing that worries me about covens is that I've heard way too many horror stories about people joining covens, and it's very obvious that the high priest or high priestess is using it to their advantage, and they are forcing people to spend a lot of money or to do things they're not comfortable with, or when someone wants to leave, they don't let them. I've heard that a few times of people being pretty much held prisoner in their coven because they're not allowed to leave, not like leave the building, like they're not like being held hostage, but like they can't leave the group if they either don't connect with it anymore or are feeling scared for their life. And I've heard that way too often. So that worries me about working in a coven or being part of a coven, unless I'm literally making my own. So that would be something that I would also consider looking into if you ever want to join a coven. I'm not really sure how you would go about doing research like that without sounding fishy and possibly making it dangerous for yourself, but it's definitely something to think about. That's kind of all I've got for solitary versus coven. In the end of the day, like, I still advocate for solitary. It's easier for me. It's also, there's no guarantee there's a coven in your area. I've never looked up covens in Toronto. There's probably a few. I just have never looked them up. And if you are part of a coven or you've made a coven, like, this is by all means, like, no disrespect. This is a totally personal view and things I've heard. And there are people that I know that love being in covens and they love working with other people, and there's nothing that says you can't practice solitary and celebrate holidays with other witches. Like, you don't have to be part of a coven to celebrate holidays together. Like, I celebrate holidays like Valentine's Day and Family Day and Christmas and stuff like that, Thanksgiving, with my friends. They're not family, and even though it's holidays that are mostly reserved for family, doesn't mean that you have to only spend it with them. So the same thing would go for our holidays and our celebrations. Like, if you have witchy friends that you want to work with, like, work with them. Just because you're working by yourself doesn't mean you have to do everything by yourself. You can definitely call on friends to up a spell, or get together for a Sabbath ritual dinner, or do the whole ritual together, or things like that. Like, just because you choose to work alone doesn't mean you have to do everything alone. So just keep that in mind. Fortunately, that brings us to the end of this episode. Make sure to subscribe for new episodes and updates, and leave a review if you can. You can find this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, and newly to YouTube, with subtitles for the hearing impaired, unless of course YouTube has updated and they've taken that away, which is completely useless. If you're on Instagram or Twitter, swing by my page under the same handle, The Witch Alone, and if you follow, make sure you say hi. I love meeting new followers, and even if I don't message you back right away, I do read them all, and I will message you back. Hey guys! Consider this your reintroduction to the podcast, as not only has it been gifted with a new name, it has also moved distribution platforms. As much as I love whoring out my Witch Alone brand all over the place, I didn't totally love that as the name for my podcast in the first place, but didn't have anything better at the time. After almost 2 years of podcasting, I have decided on the new and more permanent name, The Winding Path. Why that name, you might ask? Well, if you don't follow me on Instagram, and why don't you, and didn't see the logo reveal, you wouldn't have read my explanation. So quite simply, learning is not linear. Growth is not linear. Healing is not linear. There will always be bumps and curves and hills to go through, go around, and go over, which is why I chose The Winding Path. Any seasoned witch will tell a beginner that discovering and practicing witchcraft is a whole learning experience on its own. You have to do a lot of discovering about yourself while also learning about your chosen path and practice. This is why it takes so long to feel comfortable in your craft, and why you should never stop learning. You can't expect to unearth all your shadows, your trauma, tap into your pre-existing power, and perfect your craft in 5 years, let alone 5 weeks. So that's why the name change. If you have already subscribed on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, you won't have to resubscribe. You'll just notice new episodes updating with the new name, and the logo art has changed. With the new name, I've also moved the hosting platform from SoundCloud onto Anchor FM. With this new platform, I'll be able to more widely and more easily distribute the podcast episodes. You'll now be able to find the podcast on Google Podcasts, Breaker, Castbox, Overcast, Pocket Cast, and Radio Public. That means there are now 10 ways to listen in total, including YouTube. So there you have it. We'll keep on keeping on with the basic practice tips and techniques with the next episode on deity work. Did you know that I have a book out? The Witch's Book of Shadows, Spells, Rituals, Sabbats, and Journal Grimoire launched on the new moon on September 17th, 2020. This second and updated edition of the Kickstarter journal has 30 more pages, spell and ritual excerpts from my personal Book of Shadows, added blank space in the grimoire to put in your own correspondence, and a new grimoire section all about the zodiacs. You can buy the book on Amazon in softcover, hardcover, or ebook, or order signed copies through my personal website at www.awitchaloneShop.com. Also, starting October 1st, I'll be launching a Patreon. Monthly printable Book of Shadows pages, Discord discussions, free tarot readings, and so much more are just part of the perks you'll be able to make use of. Come find me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook under A Witch Alone. And as always, let's make some magic.